I stood in State Road next to a man whose legs had been blown off. I stood with a woman whose husband had been murdered. I stood with other people. And when President Barack Obama ran for office, and I enthusiastically supported him, I urged him to go to State Road, and he went to State Road. And when he saw what I saw, he announced that if people were sending rockets to my children's home, I would do everything in my power to stop it. And I would expect that Israel would do everything in its power to stop it. What made things even more complicated is the world knows, everybody knows, that the rockets were sent from civilian areas. We've seen videotapes. You can get them on YouTube. They're widely available of Hamas rocketeers putting their rockets deliberately in front of an UNRWA school, firing the rocket and then running away, knowing that Israel, by electronic surveillance, finds the rocket and responds, hoping that Israel would then fire a rocket that would hit an UNRWA school. We know that one of the leaders of Hamas bragged and boasted that we, Hamas, uses women and children and the elderly as human shields to protect our fighters and to deter Israel from responding and fighting back. It poses an incredibly complex and difficult moral dilemma. Professor Moshe Halbertal, who is one of the most eminent and brilliant Jewish philosophers, professor at Hebrew University, professor at NYU, often a visiting professor at Harvard, became part of an ethics group that the Israeli government established to help them develop tactics for how to deal with terrorists who hide among civilians. How do you minimize civilian deaths? And it worked quite effectively. Israel tried a great many things. First, they simply left the Gaza. And there were no blockades when they first left the Gaza. They simply left the Gaza. And as soon as they left, in the hope that they would be exchanging land for peace, the rockets began. What people often forget is that the blockade followed the rockets, didn't cause the rockets. And so that didn't work. And so Israel tried targeted killings of the rocket senders themselves. And they had some terrible failures. They killed a man who was responsible for murdering dozens of Israelis and was planning an attack on Ashdod which could have killed probably hundreds. But in killing him, they also killed between 12 and 14 civilians. And the response in Israel was outrage. The heroes of the Israeli Army and the Air Force, and Air Force pilots were finding graffiti on their cars and flat tires. The Air Force became so unpopular because they killed 14 civilians in the process of trying to kill a terrible terrorist. So, Israel needs no lessons on morality or concern about how to avoid civilian casualties. It spent so much effort doing that. When Shkedi became head of the Air Force, he was dissatisfied with the ratio of terrorists killed to civilians killed, because the ratio at that point was 1-to-1, which was about 10 times better than the ratio the United States, Great Britain had achieved in Afghanistan or in Iraq, but still it wasn't good enough. And so he changed the munitions, he changed the rules of engagement, he forbore from attacking terrorists. At one point, they used a very small bomb in order to try to kill the entire Hamas leadership, which was in one room. And because they used a small bomb, they all escaped. So he took all these decisions in an effort to prevent civilian casualties. And finally, as a result of all these, he managed to reduce the ratio of 1 civilian for 29 terrorists. No country in the history of warfare had ever achieved so low a ratio. Imagine that, 1 civilian for every 29 terrorists killed. That's lower than the ratio generally in wars that were involved in battlefields in the Second World War, the First World War. But Israel had managed to achieve that. Still, the rockets came and persisted. Israel tried to go to international organizations. They tried to get the help of Human Rights Watch, of Amnesty International, of the Security Council, the Human Rights Council, of the European community, to no avail. The rockets persisted. Israel, after all, is a democracy. Democracies have to be responsive to their people. And their people were demanding a response. And finally, the Prime Minister of Israel did 2 things in 1 week. First, he opened up all the checkpoints, and he said to Hamas, here's the carrot. We're letting in everything. We're letting in humanitarian aid. They've always let in humanitarian aid. We're letting in food. We're letting in everything. We're going to do that for a week. But if you continue to send rockets, there will be a massive response. And it was only after Hamas accelerated the number of rockets during that week of Israel opening up the borders, that Israel responded with Operation Cast Lead. It was not something that the Israeli people, the Israeli government, the Israeli military was anxious to do. It was absolutely a last resort. And so I wrote in all of my articles saying, what could Israel have done? Look, there are only 4 or 5 options. One, you simply do nothing. You simply allow the terrorists to continue to attack. Would any democracy ever accept that? Would America accept that? Remember what happened in the United States when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred? Imagine if there were attacks from Mexico or attacks from Canada or attacks from Brooklyn. No democracy would ever accept that. And so that was not an option that any government could ask Israel to accept. A second option would be to continue to try to do it on a retail basis. Targeted killings, occasionally getting a terrorist, but still the rockets persisted. A third would be perhaps a commando attack or commando attacks, but that's what Israel tried in Jenin. Remember when terrorists blew up a Seder and killed 53 Israelis having a Seder at the Park Hotel, and the people who were killed, who the terrorists came from Jenin, and Israel made a decision, a very controversial decision. It sent in ground troops, commandos. And 22 Israeli soldiers were killed by booby-trapped houses, by suicide bombers. 23 soldiers. Now, you just multiply that by that number compared to the population of the United States, and you'll see what that means to a country where everybody knows soldiers. And the soldiers' families actually brought a lawsuit against Israel, saying, how dare you send our children into these booby-trapped areas without air cover? And the Israeli Air Force said, no, we couldn't send in air cover because if we send in air cover, we might kill more civilians. So there was an instance where commandos were used. It was called a genocide. That is, the international community said 5,000 people were killed, 1,000 people were killed, ended up 52 people were killed, the vast majority of them terrorists, and 23 Israelis. So the commando raid option didn't seem like it was particularly a feasible one. Yet this report, the Goldstone report, you can read every word from beginning to end. Never in the Goldstone report is there any suggestion of what Israel could have lawfully done. The only arguments, the only statements are what Israel couldn't lawfully done. Can anybody imagine a legal system in which the rules only tell you what you can't do, but not what you can do? Imagine a self-defense definition in criminal law or any other area of law where you can't find out what's lawful, where you can only find out what's unlawful, and you find out that everything you try to do is unlawful. So finally, after the report was issued, Judge Goldstone was asked in a series of interviews, the lawyers, Tikkun magazine, not only have I read every word of the report, I've listened to every single interview that I know of. There may be some I'm not aware of. And I'm aware of every question that was put to Judge Goldstone. And he was asked the question, what could Israel have done? And I read you now his answers. He said, first of all, Israel could have taken, I joke not, he literally said this, Israel could have taken the matter to the Security Council. Now, first of all, of course, Israel has tried to take every single matter, including this one, to the Security Council. It can't, because in the Security Council, Syria, Libya, it is dominated. Not only that, but it has a China veto, it has a Russian veto. Is he serious? Does he not understand the organization that he works for? The very idea of bringing this matter to the Security Council? If Israel had brought to the Security Council the fact that Hamas was sending rockets to kill civilians, the Security Council would have condemned Israel for hurting the rockets by having them land on the hard heads of Israeli civilians. The United States would have vetoed that resolution, but that's the resolution. As Avi Yibin once said, if Algeria introduced a resolution to the UN that the earth was flat and that Israel had flattened it, it would win 196 to 22 with 13 abstentions and Britain not showing up. So the UN